My name is Pete Furman. I'm the park manager for James M. Robb-Colorado River State Park. We're one park out of 42 in the state of Colorado, and we also are now merged with Division of Wildlife, so it's now Colorado Parks and Wildlife. I manage approximately 35 miles of river access park through the Grand Valley, and I've been here since 2010. The property we're on right now is a property located just west of 29 Road here in Grand Junction. We have multiple properties between 29 and 27 and a half roads that are CPW properties, but they're not currently open to the public just because we don't have a trail going through them. So what we've been doing on this property is trying to remove some of the tamarisk and Russian olive, also taking advantage of the fact that we've got time to reclaim it prior to this being open to the public, and also maybe opening up the trail corridor in a fashion that's going to be beneficial in the future. The other thing that's important, I think, in this area anyway, is you do have kind of a wildland-urban interface with a lot of adjoining properties that are not, that are private properties, basically residences, that we want to work with those landowners also. So what we've been able to do in this area is, this is one of multiple properties that I manage that RiversEdge West has been able to assist obtaining funding sources to allow us to do some work and do kind of the initial heavy lifting, getting through this property and doing some of the tamarisk and Russian olive removal. And then also, we've got Two Rivers Wildfire Coalition. I submitted for a small amount of money with them also, where we can kind of create that defensible space on some of their property as it borders ours. So there's several things we're trying to do, I guess. One, we're trying to improve the habitat value. We're trying to do some fire mitigation, and then also we're trying to prepare it for, once it is time for a trail to go through here, the property will be ready to accommodate that use. One of the challenges we have is we've been able to pull a lot of the tamarisk and Russian olive out. You're always going to have regrowth to kind of stay on top of, but it's a little bit easier at this stage than it was before. But we've got a large amount of biomass, and that's what this is, where it's pulled Russian olive and tamarisk, and it runs roughly 75 yards, and then it's a matter of how do we get rid of this. So that's going to be a component that we need to worry about. And then also is just staying on top of the weeds that have come, were either available in the understory or maybe just a seed bank, but kind of staying on top of the secondary weeds. So we're working with the Palisade insectary, and we've released some gall wasps for the Russian knapweed, depending on distance. Most of that's over there. So we do have some releases over there, so if it's a different part of the property, we still may be using herbicide for that, and then also we're using herbicide on the smaller resprouts for tamarisk and Russian olive, but the beetle has been present really throughout the valley, and has been helping us kind of keep things in check there also. So the area behind me basically is one of the things we're trying to do with the fire mitigation. The concern is we do have a lot of homeless camps that'll pop up in some of the properties. Again, they're closed to the public, but provide shelter, I suppose. And so some people that don't have a home will stay in these areas, and when they're lighting a fire to stay warm or cook with or something like that, it's understandable, but it does create a fire hazard. And so we do end up in situations where it catches, and then we have a fire and urban interface, basically. So one of the things we were trying to do is remove a lot of the tamarisk and Russian olive in this area, stack it, which is where I was standing previously, and we've got this large area of biomass now that we've got to figure out how to get rid of, ideally, and that's a challenge in and of itself, and I'll talk a little bit about that. But ultimately, the goal is to try to create a buffer, try to limit the potential, basically, where we're going to have those type of issues, either by removing fuels or also starting to clear some of this area where it's visible and we at least know whether we've got a issue that we need to address before we do end up with a fire that gets out of control. So within this area, some of the challenges, like I said, we've piled all of the pulled tamarisk and Russian olive, or cut Russian olive. We do both of those. We've tried plucking it out of the ground. We've also used Sawyer crews to cut it at its base. Either way, you're going to be spraying for resprouts, and then we've stacked it. So by stacking it, you've got the benefit of at least you've got that defensible space created. But now we'll need to work with Division of Fire Prevention and Control, which is under the Department of Public Safety, to try to get a burn plan put together. They'll need to work with the county to find out an appropriate time to light a fire and allow this to be consumed, and that is a cumbersome process. It takes a while. It's one of the things I can show you over at Connected Lakes a little bit later, but also just discuss it. We've also tried chipping tamarisk and Russian olive, and that's certainly one way to address it, but then where do you take the chips? So I do manage a property near 30 Road here in Grand Junction. We piled them over there, but the pile's just, at this point, not degrading very quickly. And then we tried spreading them over at Connected Lakes to almost create a weed barrier, for lack of a way to put it, on a section of property that really was mainly Russian thistle. So we weren't as worried about it there, and put about a 5-inch layer of tamarisk and Russian olive chips over in that area. And then we had a visitor try to start a barbecue grill, and they were using natural ground litter, basically blew onto the ground, caught that on fire. My understanding is to put that fire out once it got into all the chips. It was about 1 million gallons that they were pulling out of the lake to try to extinguish that fire. So when you've got that amount of duff on the ground, basically, and it catches on fire, that can create an issue in and of itself. So there's different things we're looking at. There's also incinerators that we're trying to figure out, could we start putting some of this in incinerators and resolve the issue that way. But much of this is, once you remove it, what do you do with it? I still think it's better because we at least don't have the seed source, and then also we've got the, like I was talking about earlier, we've got greater visibility, and we've got the ability to get the trail through here once it comes time to do that. And I do think that that could happen in the near future. Most of the property between 27.5 and 29 is in public ownership. Most of the landowners are working with us, or at least receptive to the potential of having a trail going through this area. So it's quite possible you could have some of that. But I think one of the things that's going to be concerning is there any effort at fire mitigation? The other thing, by clearing this, and gets ahead of ourselves a little bit, but once we're able to actually put a trail through here, it'll be a hardened surface trail. Right now, it's pretty good surface here, but just behind me, you'll start to get into pretty heavy sand. So if you've got a brush truck or something like that, you're not going to want to bring it in an area that has pretty heavy sand. So I think that hardening the surface in this area will also be beneficial. And again, we're going to start working from the other side and start clearing that space also. And ultimately, I think, like I said, you're going to get improved habitat value. We've got, one thing that's unique to this area is we've got thyme. So you do have some salt grass that's already coming in and expanding a little bit. But, you know, we've got kochia to control, we've got the knapweed to control, and then we've got the resprouts to control. Those are probably the main things in this area that we're dealing with in terms of secondary weeds. The herbicide we're using for the Russian olive and tamarisk regrowth is kind of a Garland 3A and 240 mix. We usually mix those up, and we've been spraying in October. And then we're going to probably be spraying a little bit later on this month in terms of the knapweed, where we're not competing with biocontrol. We'll probably use Tellar for that. Our vegetative management plan that we completed in-house, and it was revised as recently as 2019, is the suggested recommendations basically on herbicide we'll be using is primarily focused on things that are effective and relatively inexpensive. and that's why we're using those herbicides. We have purchased Esplanade that we've used in the past, and that is fairly expensive, but it's a little more effective on kochia and kind of keeping it down in terms of that long-term control. And that may be something we start to explore in some of these burn areas specifically, where it will help us get ahead. It's really tough for us to mow in the summertime because we're busy doing other things. And so to have a type of weed that you're routinely having to mow over, that's where some of those controls that last a little bit longer may be helpful. Another thing, a little bit of a sidelight, and just for folks to consider, with the brush hog that we did bring out here, is we've hired contractors sometimes to do some work for us, but we've also done some stuff in-house. And I think how the brush hog was placed, size of the trailer, size of the truck, and things like that, we actually had an accident with the brush hog transporting it from point A to point B. So when you're moving heavy equipment, if that's going to be part of the goal in terms of your controls, just make sure that your ability to move that heavy equipment is within capacity limits, basically on your vehicles and on your trailers, and how it's mobilized on the trailer, how it's secured on the trailer, and make sure you get there safely. The other thing, I guess, as long as we're talking about safety, the other thing I'll mention for your folks doing the field work is we have dropped some larger Russian olive in some of the lakes that we managed previously. And that's, I think there's some benefit of just leaving it there as fish habitat. We've done some of that. We've also pulled some of them out. But, having the right people on a tractor and just making sure you're paying attention to what cuts we've had, because I had one guy jump out of the way of a tractor and land on a newly cut Russian olive, and it tore the inside of his leg up. So these are things that just be safe when you're doing the work. Be safe with the chipper. Drink your water, take your breaks. Don't get heat exhaustion. We've had that go on also. And I think some of that can be depending on the age of your staff and also your volunteers, if you've got volunteer groups. It's worthwhile work, but it's hard work. And I think understanding that also, if you're supervising crews, is good. So we're at Connected Lakes now, and the area specifically we're at is an area that got impacted by a fire on July 4th of 2019. Someone was firing off illegal fireworks in the subdivision above the park, caught that area on fire, and then ultimately came into the park, and ember came into the park. Ignition point is about probably 200 yards that way, kind of to the northwest, and then at that point ran up to the east through the park, basically burned a total of 6 acres. You had 2 engine crews basically working the fire in this area, and then also they brought a heavy helicopter out of Rifle to provide support also. And I think that's really what ended up being able to put this fire out and keep it at 6 acres. However, in the course of, I think both in terms of the weight of the water dropping on top of the cottonwood trees, that caused some damage to limbs. And the other thing is cottonwoods just don't react well to fire. It ended up costing a lot of the cottonwoods that are in this area. So after the fire was extinguished, and that took about, I think they had it extinguished by about 6 o'clock at night, we had state Forest Service come in and assess the trees as whether they were hazard trees or not. And one of the things with the hazard tree is if it's an area that you're inviting the public to come, that's going to increase the potential safety risks. And then, so all these areas that have trails and all the areas that have benches and are underneath an area that has a cottonwood that either the snag could fall or the whole tree could fall, that contributed to the decision where we ended up taking down a lot of the cottonwoods that were impacted by the fire. You do have some regeneration coming up from the roots, and ecologically, I mean, if it's a cottonwood bush, the ecological benefit is about the same as a cottonwood tree. It just doesn't provide that same shade or anything like that that a larger cottonwood would do for you. In terms of the future use of this area, we're kind of in some preliminary stages. One of the challenges has been getting control of the kochia, and it's just uneven terrain, and then also a lot of the down cottonwoods makes it more difficult to mow this area and try to stay on top of the kochia. But we'll try to do a little bit better job next year for that. But another thing that's being discussed right now is possibly shaving down some of the soil in this area, or excavating out some of the soil and then putting it into the lake in certain areas, and improve your wetland habitat in the lake. The seed bank, the seed bank that contains a lot of weeds, but it's an upland seed bank. Move that into an aquatic environment, and so you don't end up with those seeds germinating. And then this brings this to a little bit lower water table. It also gives us an opportunity where we've gotten rid of the seed bank, and we can kind of start fresh and try to reestablish some vegetation in here, improve this 6 acres, and also improve some of the wetland habitat in the lake. There's another parcel that we have, or it's another section of the park that's kind of northwest of here that will do the same thing in that area, where we'll scrape soil that has a pretty heavy upland seed bank, move it into an aquatic environment. There being that seed wouldn't generate then, the aquatic environment would be improved passively, basically, by ducks coming in to utilize that area, and that somewhat happens now. And then also we'd have a little bit better luck with the upland reclamation of that area also. So I've shared you kind of a preliminary plan that was done with that purpose. I've been in conversations with some of my colleagues on the wildlife side of the agency, seeing if this could fit in terms of a larger landscape plan, and we're looking at really all CPW properties throughout the valley, and trying to, rather than worry about a specific 6 acres at connected lakes, looking more along the lines of a landscape scale, all CPW properties throughout the valley, and see if there's things we can do to improve the overall habitat value, leveraging a variety of funds, whether it's CPW funds, whether it's continuing to work with RiversEdge West, Two Rivers Wildfire Coalition. Those are different options in terms of trying to support the end goal of improving the habitat value, decreasing the risk of fire, and providing visitors a safe place to enjoy. So one of the things that's been a little bit of a challenge in this area is, once we have done removal of tamarisk and Russian olive, or when we have a fire go through and we have to take down cottonwood trees that are deemed as hazardous, is kind of the public interaction and public reaction to some of those decisions. And I think a big part of my job is people management and explaining why we're doing certain things. But it seems like over time concerns start to mitigate, or maybe moderate, is a better way to put it. When the fire hit, we immediately had visitors wanting to know, why was the trail closed? And so it was constantly, well, the trail's closed for the hazard trees, and some people would bypass anyway. So then it was, well, you take down the hazard trees. Well, why did you take down the hazard trees? So explain why we felt they were hazardous and why we made the decision to drop them. And now we're kind of in a phase of, what are you going to do now that you've dropped them? And so, we're looking at, all right, now we can move them and create fill in they would have a role to play in terms of fill in the lakes. So it's kind of this constant explanation. This is why we're doing what we're doing. This is why you're seeing what you're seeing, and trying to elicit the public support. The reclamation part of this, that's where I think you start to receive a little bit better feedback or acceptance from the public. So when they do see some of the cottonwoods coming back from the root system, when they do see you're actively trying to reclaim an area, I think that's helpful. It has been a challenge in terms of reclaiming this area, and I think, again, by lowering the topography and getting a little bit closer to the water table, I think that's going to help with the reclamation. Also getting rid of the competing seed banks, that's going to help with the reclamation also. For the most part, the areas that we've had success at connected lakes with reclamation, it's been involved one of two things. Either you take potted plants, deep root plants, so we were able to acquire some things that had the root system was already about 24 inches in length. That's close to the water table anyway when we get to it. Those seem to have performed better than others. We've had some pretty good success with buffalo berry in the area, and New Mexico privet has also done well. Sumac has done well, and you can look around, and sumac does well on its own out here. And then if we can get right next to the water table, cottonwoods have done well too. There's a north bench, basically there's 20 acres kind of on the north side of the park that we worked on back in 2012. It was cleared of all the tamarisk and Russian olive, and at that time, the people that I was dealing with in the public were arguing that, well, it looks like a bomb blew up. Well, we got rid of all the tamarisk and Russian olive, and their perception was that was like a bomb went off. So subsequent to that, we have been able to, and quite successful in that area, we used hydroseeding basically, and that proved to be pretty effective. We were originally planning on putting in some cottonwood pole plantings in that area. And we kept on hitting concrete blocks, cars, trucks, different things like that were used as riprap in the subsoil. It protected the lakes, but it made reclamation, especially with something you're trying to punch a hole in the ground, very difficult. So we turned around and used some of those funds instead of trying to put cottonwoods in. We just ended up putting native grasses in, and the native grasses have actually done pretty well. And then when we have flood events, and that area does support some flood events, we are seeing some cottonwoods coming in from seed, and that's an area we've been able to do a pretty good job of keeping any regrowth of tamarisk and Russian olive at bay, and also supporting that those grasses. One of the things it's going to be moved into endangered fish lake, but part of what we're doing also is by cutting the other 10 acres down and moving that as fill into endangered fish lakes. If you look at that area right now, you'll see there's not a lot growing. That's an area we tried doing some seeding with straw, and it didn't take. And then we've also tried kind of disturbing the soil kind of in different pockets. So you have a soil that has several different pockets throughout it, and that water, the hope is water can accumulate in those basins. And it's just been very arid since we tried to do that, and we haven't seen a lot germinating. There's some, but that's just an area the last few years where we continue to suffer from drought, where we're getting those type of things to germinate is tough. And I think if we can get some flooding again, if we can get some more moisture, the seed should still be viable, and maybe we'll have some success. But so far we haven't seen much over there, so it's a little bit concerning as far as that's concerned. You need water, and water can be difficult in this area because it doesn't naturally flood anymore. So it's in this area, it would be requiring us to use mechanical means. Areas that we've had success with irrigation and cottonwoods, if you can flood irrigate, you can get cottonwoods. If you can't flood irrigate, you're probably not going to do it. So this is going to be more grasses and stuff like that. And then, again, maybe some of the cottonwoods coming up from the root systems and regerminating that way.